And thank you to the rest of you for joining us as well. I realize a lot of people are still networking outside, but hopefully we'll have more join us. And of course, the session is being recorded. So we are actually here to have a very, very important discussion, which is how do we expand the pool of capital going into impact investing. I'll just set some brief context introductory remarks. I've been working in this sector now for, I think, 15, 16 years, ever since I moved back to India in 2005. I joined impact investing in 2006 or 7. I think there were 5 impact funds at that time. That sector grew. A lot of stuff has happened, which we're all familiar with, from the microfinance story to whatnot. Today, that sector is being covered in track 1, equity impact investing, the traditional stuff. The second track is basically blended finance, which is expanding this now to the not-for-profit side and the deeper impact side. And the third track, which is really where we're at, is in a way the most significant one, which is how do you create broad-based scale? It cannot be seen as a niche industry anymore. So as Ramraj was saying, how do we attract large pools of capital into this space? So I just wanted to just set the context by laying out some basic statistics. First on impact investing, then on AIFs, and then on the larger SDG financing gap, and then turn to each of the panelists here who represent, if I can say, the 2 most significant government or government-backed financing institutions which have deployed a lot of money into this space. And then, of course, the Hero Group, which has been one of the most active contributors from the private sector. So what are these stats? Impact investing, there was a study done by Ramraj and myself when I was at Asha Impact to map a decade of trends and data in the space. And the total number was 12 billion in a decade, from 2010 to 2019. So not very high. 12 billion of total investments funding about 600 startups. This is a very careful ground-up calculation. The IFC will tell you that 2 trillion globally is invested in impact investing. Okay, that's about 2% of global AUM of 100 billion, of 100 trillion of global AUM. 2% of that is invested in impact investing broadly. That's the vaguest definition of that. 600 billion of that are people who are actually measuring impact. So that's the total. Now, this industry is growing in India. IIC is now putting out annual data on how much impact investing happens. So it's on the order of magnitude of $1 to $2 to $3 billion a year. So that's impact investing. And what is it doing? It's seeding all of these innovative business models and helping to raise private capital. But the domestic component of impact investing, no one knows for sure, but I would estimate it at less than 10%. Now coming to the AIF and Category 2s, which is the larger, private equity capital in India. Let me just pull up these numbers. As of June 2022, which is just a few months back, the Cat 2 AIF corpus is 5.6 lakh crore. That's $75 billion. The 1-year growth in that was 1.5 lakh CR, or 20 billion. So meaning it's gone from 55 to 75 in 1 year. Just as an FYI, I just checked, the total market cap of all the unicorns in India is 32 billion recently. So it's quite concentrated. And according to, we should credit the source here as well. This is data from Traction and TVS Capital. The domestic portion is about 20%, so only about 7.5 billion. But it has got the potential to grow 60,000 crores. So when the grantster tells us about how much SIDBI has put in, you'll see what a large portion of that has come from just 1 or 2 institutions, right? And here's the interesting calculation. So every year, $25 billion is being invested in the sector. If you take a 12% return on that over 6 to 8 years, that's $25 billion of profit. So that's what Ramraj's point about Atmanirbhar. That's a lot of capital that's coming out of our country. And the questions for all of you would be the pension funds, the insurance, even retail. How do we unlock these pools into AIF? And the final point is, so you see the scale of the numbers, right? 12 billion of impact investing. $75 billion of AIF money in India. And what is the financing need globally? There was a report put out by Force for Good, which is all these private equity firms. And the estimate is 176 trillion is the global cost of meeting the SDGs. This figure has gone up by 25%. It used to be lesser because of COVID. And as we said, there's 100 trillion of liquid AUM managed by third-party asset managers, and 450 trillion is global wealth, if you include all the assets. So out of that, roughly 25% is needed to meet the SDGs, and the funding gap is basically most of it. Of this 176, the funding gap is 135 trillion, and India's can be a fairly large percentage. So this is why all of these discussions that we're having are important in the context of ESG, public finance, climate finance. All capital needs to come into this space, right? But let's, with that context, now I would like to just sort of maybe, go through each of the panelists, and maybe in the first round of questions, you could just share a little bit about your own individual institutional journey. That what has your institution been focused on? How have you looked at capital deployment into the impact space? How do you define impact? So maybe we can go through, each of the panelists here. Maybe starting with Vikrant from SIDBI. That SIDBI has really pioneered this space in India. The multiplier effect that you've seen, I think over 40 funds you've seeded. So could you share a little bit more about your experience, please?
Yeah, thank you, Kartik, and thank you, ISC, for having us here. SIDBI started its journey in this ecosystem about 3 decades ago. So we realized that there was a need of investments in the MSME sector, not only as far as the lending was concerned, but also as far as the equity investments are concerned. And we started helping the state government setting up regional funds. So there was a 2-pronged approach. We provided equity support to the AMCs of state governments, and we also invested in the corpus of the venture capital funds which are being set up by these states. So the funds were set up by Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Punjab, Gujarat, governments like these. And a few of these funds are still operational and they're still contributing to the ecosystem. We also helped set up some incubation centers, the most prominent being one in the IIT Kanpur, which is one of the most renowned IT tech incubation centers in the country. Thereon we moved on to investing in all India funds, and we had certain schemes which were mandated by the government of India, like MSME risk capital funds, where we did mezzanine funding through our own direct sources, as well as we invested into various VC and VC funds and AIFs. We have had another scheme which was called India Aspiration Fund. That was operational till 2016, where when we decided that we won't be investing out of our own balance sheet funds anymore, and the government of India, based on SIDBI's experience, entrusted us with the Fund of Fund for Startups, which was a part of the Startup India Action Plan, and that became operational in somewhere around March 2017. At the same time, Ministry of MSME also gave us 310 crores under Aspire Fund. That again is operational right now. And most recently, we have tied up with the government of Uttar Pradesh, and we are managing a 1,000 crore UP Startup Fund on the behalf of government of Uttar Pradesh. So, as far as the experience is concerned, the mandate always was that the money should go to the MSMEs which were facing difficulties in raising finance from other sources. And the multiplier effect has been there. In the earlier funds, we did not make too much returns, but the money was not drained, that is to say. The recent funds have been returning very good amount of money, and the FFS, which is of a fairly recent vintage, has returned almost 22% of the money that was disbursed till date. So, if I talk about FFS, which is the flagship scheme that is being operated by SIDBI right now, we have committed around 7,900 crores to 88 funds. We have disbursed around 2,900 crores to 64 funds. These 64 funds have invested in around 720 startups. The money which has gone into these startups is around 11,200 crores from the ecosystem. So that is the multiplier effect. The norm that we stipulate to the AIFs is that 2x of the money that FFS commits to any AIF has to go into startups. Now the experience has been that around 3.81 times is actually going into startups. That is sort of an impact that is being created. by FFS and being the anchor investor in most of the AIFs that we are committing to. So when I say anchor, I mean that either SIDBI comes in prior to the first closing or is writing the largest stake in the AIF. So the idea is that a pool of capital should be created by these AIFs from other investors, and the money should be channelized towards startups and MSMEs.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up question. I think we have so many fund managers here looking to raise funds, and as you said, 88 of them have come through. Many of them, I think, have been seed stage, but I guess one question is, are you also looking at growth stage? And what have been, if I may, some of the lessons that you have found about what makes a good manager versus a not good manager when you've evaluated so many? Just something which would be helpful for the GPs in the audience.
You would be happy to know that out of the 88 funds that FFS has committed to, 38 are first-time fund managers. And 8 are women-led AIFs. So the idea is to seed first-time fund managers. Of course, there has to be some experience with the fund managers. It shouldn't be that anybody can just set up a fund and ask for money, because it's, after all, public money, my money, your money, and it has to go into safe hands. It has to come back. But the focus has always been to seed newer fund managers. As far as Kartik, you asked what makes a good fund manager, what we look at while committing money is whether the fund manager is actually giving something plus something more than mere funds to the companies that it's seeding, right? Whether there is some sort of hand-holding, whether they are providing professional services, then whether they are helping the startups improve their governance mechanism. So all these things are there, which make us feel that this could be a better fund manager than all the others in the market. Apart from this, something what we look at, and that is something controversial with the fund managers, is that we ask them to rely more on the carries that they are confident of generating rather than harping on the management fee upfront, right? So that is one sign of a good fund manager, that the fund manager is confident of his capabilities and is confident that he'll be able to generate good returns out of the investee companies, and he's ready to take up a lower management fee upfront and is ready to take a higher carry maybe later on. Right. So that is something which we ask the fund manager and look at.
Very interesting. Certainly, I think those incentives are quite crucial.
And just to add to that, I'll tell you why this thing is there. That this is a 10,000 crore fund, right? So you take a 2% management fee, and if we take an average fund life of 10 years, so 20% is actually going to the fee, right? So out of 10,000 crores, I would be actually giving 2,000 crores as fee, and only 8,000 crores would be going to the market. So that is the broad idea why we ask for a lower management.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Moving now to Satish, and I think SBI, of course, being I think the largest bank, the largest PSU bank, and also the range of institutions which are there with Life and with General and with all of the capital available. I think many people would be aware of the large private equity investments made by SBI in everything from the NIF, the National Infrastructure Fund. These are huge investments. We'd be curious as to how many GPs here in the impact space are you looking at supporting the direct investments that you're making, as well as the market building investments and everything from a build desk to a credit bureau. So could you lay out for us, how does SBI look at private equity?
Thank you, everyone. See, being the largest bank in India, we have privilege and responsibility not only towards generating, supporting the sustainable impacting through our operations, but through our investments also. And that is the reason why we whenever it comes to impact investing, I think State Bank of India was always there creating impact in India. You can say it through philanthropic approach, or we are there in each and every remote part of the country. So, in fact, in the last years or so, we have come up and we are driving our strong performance through three pillars, which is across people, planet, and profit. So, of course, we, as a part of private equity investment, will not compromise on returns, of course, because we have to do it again and again. It's not one time that I have to do investments. As far as State Bank of India's investment goes into the picture, we are participating upfront. It means, for example, you can say not only upfront, but we are participating in large ticket also. For example, you might have heard about the Swami Fund, which is actually a special window for affordable and mid-house, where all the stalled project was to be funded. So State Bank of India, they partner with the Government of India and put in a large chunk, around 1,250 crore rupees as one go, and many more to go in that direction. Then creating infrastructure was always a focus, since we are a debt-oriented organization. So through debt also we supported, and through equity investment like National Investment Trust. So we also participated with Government of India and shell out more money in that matter. So that was through the LP side, but we felt a need in terms of creating an impact. So we again, through our subsidiary, which is SBI Cap Venture Limited, we just put in our shoes into the LPs, and then we formed NEEV 1 fund and NEEV 2. NEEV 1 fund was focusing on creating social and environmental and infrastructure in the country, and directly serving or directly putting equity to the poorest state of the nation. And the NEEV 2 fund was focusing on SMEs, where we are not targeting SMEs which are on the verge of becoming mid-corporate and all, but lower side of SMEs, for example, where they have 50 crore rupees of up to 50 crore rupees of investment in their plant and machinery, and below 50 crore rupees of their turnover. So these are the investment which has been done from private equity side. And if I go through, take you through to the philanthropic side, we have our own SBI Foundation, which actually takes care of the grants. So we are partnering with so many institutions to provide. Name a few, for example, in assistive technology for disabled people, we have partnered with Social Alpha, where we are actually giving them the grant to the entrepreneurs who are actually developing assistive technology solutions for the disabled people. So this is sort of the introduction about the State Bank of India, who was there in this space for a very long time. As far as my story goes, my desk, which I take care of that, it is a part of treasury. So where I'll be funding these operations or doing investment rather from the bank's balance sheet. So for me, the approach will be different. Of course, the State Bank of India is doing or achieving its goal through different subsidiaries and different vehicles. So this is what all about the State Bank of India, the private equity story.
Thank you so much for that background. I just wanted to follow up and on something specific. You mentioned that this is balance sheet financing coming from the treasury. So how does a bank, of course, is risk averse, which is completely understandable. The question is, how do you look at not just private equity investments, but this whole notion of impact? You spoke about that. You guys talk about people, planet, and profit. Of course, profit has to be at a market basis. So how do you think about impact? And how does that risk calculation affect how you can deploy capital? And how is that different perhaps from some of the group entities? We know that in insurance, which one? I think in either insurance or pension, one of the places is restricted to 1.5. I think in pensions it's now allowed, but the practical guidelines are not there. So when you guys are meeting at a group level, I'm sure these discussions must be going on. Could you shed a little bit of light on that?
Yeah, sure. See, when we discuss about as a group, through our arms, like pension fund, SBI pension fund, SBI Life, SBI General, and SBI Treasury, many of the discussions, move around, how we look at investments and all, and what are the difficulties that, similar kind of difficulties which we are facing when we want to make an investment. So if we have some shortlisted criteria. Based on that, we evaluate the investments. So as far as the LPs consideration, then because large book is handled by me, which is from the LPs perspective. So as an LP, the key consideration which we have actually discussed about, and it is not State Bank of India. It is I'm talking about each and every institutional investor when we meet and we do some discussion about that. So first consideration, who are the other investors? When I look at other investors who are investing alongside us, so that gives a name, and which part of the investment cycle I have to focus on. If I will be able to investment at a seed level, or do I have to go at a later stage, Series B, Series C? So these also form part of our discussions. Then how to diversify our portfolio across regions and geographies. Like you might have seen, Bangalore is a startup capital, and there are few centers, but you do not hear other cities' name where the impact has to be created upon. So you might have heard about some startups are coming up at Patna, which is of course nobody will see that there is a startup which will be coming from tier 2 or tier 3 cities. But you will always see that people are coming and they are telling startup is based out in Bangalore. Okay, so this is one thing. And as far as impact investing goes, what is the in-house GP's capability of handling the impact investment, their investment impact process, rather I say. In that sometimes we emphasize on to give more elaborative elaborative feature about their investment process. So sometimes we have seen, it is our experience that more genuine GPs, they will be able to give in-depth responses. However, for some it will be just a tagline. So these are the problems normally. So clear due diligence process. You said clear organizational structures. This is all the things which are key consideration which normally we dwell into. And as far as the demand goes, as an LP, the demand is there should be a high level of transparency. Most of the times I felt if I want to do some analysis, or if I want to come out some solutions, I do not have the data to represent, which is actually lacking here. So the data will come from the industry only. So high level of transparency is needed. And as far as impact is clear impact monitoring, measuring, and reporting approaches. So this is what people will be able to show. Okay, this is how we measure. This is how we report. So going more in depth, and other things which I say a better track record, better branding. Of course, brand name sometimes it will not be there, but a strong capability of sourcing deals. We always ask them how do you mine your deals? What is the process? Because the universe which is available to each and everyone is same. But what is your process to mine the deal and shortlist the deal? So this is what the major thing. And last but the last, the thing is that the governance part. How actually at the GP level, there is a balance between the key individuals and stakeholders, and at the same time aligning with the LP's interest. So this is what the major thing we as an institutional LP looks into.
Thank you so much for that. That was really, really fabulous, and you clearly laid out how an institutional LP looks at the things. 2 points I wanted to just emphasize for the audience. I asked you about measuring impact, and many people give these vague answers that we have some framework, and everyone has a framework. But you actually touched upon the two key aspects, which is geography and transparency. That ultimately you're looking at the actual effective data coming from the GP, so it's not impact washing. And the geographic aspect, we talked about stats of how much money is flowing into India. I think most of that, whatever it was, 5.6 lakh crore, is sitting in 3 or 4 cities: NCR, Bombay, Bangalore, Karnataka, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu. And let alone the tier 2 towns, it barely goes into tier 3. And this is where the role of both the SIDBI and an SBI comes in, because you're national institutions, you've got branches everywhere. An Indian citizen who walks into a branch in Patna is no different from one who walks into one in Bombay. So you can actually be in a position to give that person a startup investment, much more so than someone like myself.
Currently, I just cited an example. I'm looking after the direct investments as well. So there is one deal which is in healthcare sector. So it didn't come through from anyone. I just came across this guy, and I'm sure that he's going to create an impact in healthcare industry in entire India. And you might have seen, in COVID-19 period, the specific keys which were missing is the critical, ICU and all that stuff. So this guy is so brilliant, and I'm not be disclosing that, but I'm really sure about it, and that is how I approach. And he was, though it is the first time, he was the first time just IIT pass out. So, but even then, I was thanking him. At least I came across to him, and he's gonna create impact in the entire healthcare industry. So these kind of things which comes, and he's not in healthcare industry. Impact will not only be still limited to one geography; it will be across India. So those kind of deals formally we look into. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Mohit, finally coming to you to get the perspective of a private corporation and an individual. I think all of us here were very, very excited a few years ago when we heard that amazing news that Mr. Munjal had committed a large amount to a certain fund called Avishkar, which is one of the pioneers of the space, and others. And it's just been I'm going to use this word, a source of desperation for those of us in the impact investing industry to say, why is the domestic capital so less? We can't be counting on the development of our country only from capital coming from outside, welcome though it is. So it's absolutely critical to have HNIs and family offices participate. We have seen that happening in philanthropy with Mr. Premji, Mr. Dhawan, Mrs. Nilekani and others. But in the for-profit impact investing space, much less. I used to run an institution called Asha Impact, which had some UHNIs and so on, but not at this scale. And here's the power of it. A UHNI can seed equity, their corporation through CSR and ESG can do wonderful, fabulous things. So I think it's and I know you guys are investing in funds, you're doing direct. So I think since then so much has happened. So could you walk us through the sort of, I guess, your investment philosophy? How do you look at sectors, returns? How do you look at impact and what the portfolio looks like?
Before I start, I just want to say, in most conversations when we sit in a meeting, our team sits in a meeting, we say we manage one of the largest private pools of capital. And it feels amazingly small sitting next to these two gentlemen that are managing that kind of capital. It's humbling. But I just want to tell you a little bit about how we think. The way our thought process is, we feel that traditional capital in private sector can play a very important role in tackling some of the most important social and economic challenges that there are. And especially over the last couple of years, if we've learned anything, that the world can no longer turn a blind eye to these social and environmental causes issues. And traditionally, I feel investors have feared directing capital towards enterprises that create these social and environmental benefits because people feel that there may be a lack of scale in these businesses. They may find difficult to attract capital, carry additional risk, less liquidity, and hence exit may be difficult. But as I was preparing for this session, I read a McKinsey study which said they analyzed the top 50 exits recently, and the top 50 exits yielded at an aggregate level north of 10% odd IRR for the investors in the impact space. And if you look at the top third of the investments, the yield is north of 34-35 odd percent, which is fairly healthy. And so we as investors are looking to make real difference on ground through our investments while also making attractive returns. While we look for businesses that create an impact, we don't forget return. We are growingly cognizant of the ESG ratings of businesses and how these businesses manage their relationships with their communities, with their workforces, with their critical stakeholders. Anybody who knows Hero, we've always been very, very mindful of how we deal with our supply chain and the front and the back end. So we firmly believe that India remains an economy that has much to offer to both companies who wish to work towards betterment of the society and the planet, as well as investors who are looking to allocate their capital towards conscious investing while also making their return expectations. So that's the thought process at our end.
Can you talk a little bit more about what your current portfolio looks like in terms of direct funds, impact funds, commercial funds?
Sure. I would avoid going too much into the proprietary allocations of the fund, but at a macro level, the one investment in Avishkar that you talked about was, I guess, the beginning of our journey into the space, or one of the most publicly talked about ones. We do a lot of work, and especially a lot of direct investing ourselves, that focuses on creating impact beyond just financial returns. So just to give you a sense, we're invested into a company called AgroStar, which does a lot of work on the agri input as well as now on the agri output side. We recently invested into this company that wants to, it's called Cartinos, based out of Bombay, wants to create a lot of impact on making cancer care accessible to the ordinary Indian, right? So for us, impact, when we think about impact, it's not a special mindset or a special capital pool, or it's just the way we do business. In every investment that we make and we present to our investment committee, there are at least few slides that get talked about on how this business is going to provide just beyond financial returns, and what is it going to do for the broader good of society. So that's par for the course of normal business for us.
And you know, the concerns that you mentioned that sometimes institutional LPs or corporations have, right? The lack of scale, return, liquidity, exit. Do you see some of those concerns going away? I mean, I'm just harking back to my own experience in pitching impact investing to HNIs and different funders, and often they'll say that the word impact assumes a lower return if they're coming from a business background. Some funds are removing the word impact from their name as a result of that, because of this thing. So, you know, how do you see, because you guys have been on this journey since Avishkar, how have those discussions evolved, and do you see other corporations also coming into this space?
No, I think we are seeing this more and more often these days, that investors are more cognizant, and there's a Bain study recently that said in Asia Pac, if you compare returns of overall investments made versus investments made that have paid attention to consciousness. Right. The returns have been, I think MOIC that they computed over the last 5 years was 2.5 for non-quote unquote impact and socially responsible investing versus 3.5 for socially conscious investments. So I think the conversation over the last 4 or 5 years has changed significantly, and it's becoming more of a norm that these good practices play center stage to your investing theory as opposed to just good to have.
Oh, fabulous. And I think that's the perfect answer, right? Because whether it's the E, the S, or the G, I think the data is now starting to come in. Often people thought of environment is just an externality. Why would I pay for it? I think on social, we kind of get it. The better you treat other human beings in your supply chain, of course, you're going to be better off. And then even on gender, there was a beautiful piece of research that Vikrant Gandhi, my former boss, did at Harvard Business School called the SHE Index, where they basically showed a 300 basis points improvement on a mutual fund. This was by State Street, the 8th largest asset manager in the world, on, I don't know, on the NASDAQ or one of the US NYSE indices over the last 25 years. So they keep all of the financial factors, but they said in addition to that, let's just weigh it by balance on the board. And they found 3 percentage points higher because those corporations make better decisions in crises. So you say that's really the reason to do it.
I mean, you're right. I think it's impact investing is coming out of it. It used to be uncool at one point in time. Then people feared that the returns were not that good. Then it became fashionable. I think now it's more mainstream, and the data, like you rightly said, the data is starting to come in, and investors are seeing that there are better returns to be had if you're more mindful about the places you're investing, the entrepreneurs you're investing with, the ultimate cause that the business is solving for the broader good. The numbers are starting to come in, and you're seeing the results.
Super. Thank you so much. I do want to leave some time for audience questions. So please, I would request all of you guys to ask probing, provoking questions and think of some. I just have one question to all of you guys and to get your thoughts on, which is we've spoken so eloquently about your own experiences. Thank you for that. Sharing the perspective, and as you said, of the best balance sheets, and I would add the quality aspect to that as well. And the question is this: how do you get others involved? That the domestic capital scene is still so small. All of you must be focusing on, as you said, co-investors. Many of them are large global development institutions, which is fine. But any thoughts on that? How do we crowd in more capital? From what sources do you think it can come? Pension, insurance, retail, HNI, other corporates. How do we go about it as an industry association? I would love any thoughts on that, because that is ultimately the objective. How do we crowd in more commercial capital? What's preventing it? What are the issues?
So, SIDBI realized this, that there was a shortage of institutional capital in this ecosystem, and we entered into MOUs with LIC for co-investing into various funds that SIDBI is running. We also have an MOU with FCDO, where the funds covered by SIDBI under FFS are taken up by FCDO for investments by them. And we realized that there is a need for other institutional investors to come in, and SIDBI keeps on trying to, at the policy level, as well as its interactions with other institutions, in voting them into coming forward and investing more into this space. As far as HNIs, family offices, and individuals are concerned, we realize that there is a lot of untapped capital lying into tier 2, 3, or even tier 4 cities, which is actually not tapped right now, and it's lying unused. And for that, a lot of education is required, because people actually don't know this asset class as of now. Even in cities, if you ask high net worth individuals, they won't be knowing what exactly this is and what are the benefits and risks involved. So a lot of education, I would say, is required to tap this unsourced capital.
Yeah, I think this tier 3, 4 cities is a huge point, right? Because India's wealth is not quite distributed. We had done something called a Punjab Innovation Mission, which was like a 200 crore fund for Punjab. And the idea was that it was from investors from that state. And I've seen people doing angel networks in places like Odisha and stuff. But even in a small town in Odisha, you'll have 10 guys from there who are wealthy. And they're probably friends in some tie or some angel network somewhere. And then you get them to invest back in that region. And again, the CDB or SBI, you keep realizing this, because you guys have a presence there. Those of us who are living in Delhi or New York or whatever, it's much harder for us to realistically do that. So great. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I want to add one thing into that. Like, you might have heard recently we opened a startup branch in India, first of its kind in Bangalore. And I want to add that why we did that, because we felt the need. We need to support this ecosystem, and of course, startup at the very first stage, they will not become eligible for debt. But why don't we rope in the banking system? Like, we always ask, what is your background, what is your track record and all that stuff. So we are trying to rope in the startups, and not only startups, we are approaching to funds where we have invested, their investee companies, to come and use that startup branch where all the parameters, all their banking needs, including debt also will be met. So slowly we are developing the product, to fund the startups, not in terms of equity but debt also. And we are the one who will be pioneering in that. So next week we're going to open the branch in Gurgaon, and next one is Hyderabad. So in this current year we'll be opening around 7 to 8 branches.
And what happens in a startup branch? It's only for startup?
No, it's only for the startup, basically to make them available the capital. Sometimes it happens I'm not able to fund it directly because of the constraints, but I'll make that startup a branch of that ecosystem. So they will have access to the funds which I already invested in. There are funds which I'm going to invest into, and there are other startups, founders, and mentoring, and we have a large setup of each and every subsidiaries. So providing each and every parameter of their startups need. So that was our idea to open a startup branch in India.
Super. No, this is fantastic. What an amazing example. Just to build on that, I presume you guys will be doing some co-investments, right? Like we'll be co-investing in an impact fund, the commercial VC fund, with other family offices. I had done a lot of work with Mr. Chandani and InfoEdge, and we used to be thrilled by that. Asha Impact would invest 1 million and InfoEdge would invest 4 million. And we invested in a similar company to AgroStar. So again, same question. How do we bring more capital into this? in this space.
Yeah, I think Satish, one point I want to say before. जैसे आप देखते हैं कि और कौन इन्वेस्टर इस फंड में पैसे डाल रहा है, as the other side of the table, we also look अगर SIDBI ने पैसे डाले हैं कि नहीं डाले हैं. Exactly. But no, that's kudos to and credence to the work that the responsible capital and responsible folks at SIDBI do as they are allocating taxpayers' capital. But this is one of the question that you ask, Kartik, is a big one, and a lot of us, I sit on a lot of CII panels that we are grappling towards how do you bring more domestic capital into impact investments as well as overall Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem. I think some of these organizations like TIE, like IIC, like CIAs, like have done a lot of good work in being able to educate domestic investors that private investment as an asset class is here to stay and can deliver returns. It's not. Sometimes it scares me that the proliferation of private capital to a retail investor, while as a capital markets individual, I would want to have a wider proliferation of private investment, but it is a little bit scary to see if individuals who don't understand the risk return profile also getting into the asset class. But I think lately there's been a lot of education of this space that has happened, and domestic investors, especially the UHNI, the more well-informed ones, are taking a shine to this asset class and wanting to allocate capital. So my sense is it's a matter of time when we start to see more domestic investors own a larger piece of this ecosystem.
Super. I hope you guys have some questions.
I have not a question, but addition to this.
Okay.
In terms of this second tier 2 side, a lot of investments are happening in the tier 2 tier cities.
Yes.
If you've heard of venture catalyst, they are doing a lot of work.
Sure.
But not for impact investments.
Sure.
They are having, in fact, the deals are not there. So many times you have a problem with the deals, but otherwise it's happening.
So let's pose that question.
And the one more
you see
I
that?
want to make, yeah.
Sorry.
Good point.
The one more spawn I'll add. Yes, to that, add to that why startup branches.
Yes.
The whole idea is, my opinion, of course, I've been discussing with some senior people of SBI.
Yes.
They think the mindset is different. See, if you're a banker, to do in startups is different. If you go to a regular bank, they will not do. So here, the mindset itself is different for a startup branch person.
Fair. And I think on the first part of the question, do you see that there's a challenge itself? Because that's an important question. So the way I would put it is that there's a lot of talent in tier 2, tier 3 towns, but that talent needs to be given appropriate support. We're working with some wonderful people, I'll mention them. So Sabrid Blended Finance Facility of USAID. They support like dozens and dozens of healthcare entrepreneurs all over India. They're very impact focused, not because they're taking some low returns, but because they're focusing on healthcare entrepreneurs in tier 2, tier 3 cities. So this starts to happen by itself. Let's invest in more women entrepreneurs. Let's invest in more tier 3, tier 4 entrepreneurs. Unke liye mushkil ho jata hai kabhi when entrepreneurs need support and all. So these guys do that. They do that support, which I'm sure you guys also do. You have the programs and all. And on your point about venture capitalists and impact, I think that's also okay. I think people are just starting to realize that as long as you build good, solid startups, it's going to happen. There's a lot of questions to cover. I do want to ask one more question because you guys have raised some issues. How do we bring in more capital? There's tax issues for domestic LPs, right? And there's an expert committee and all of that. I wanted to ask your views on retail, because retail can be a huge category. You can bring it in through mutual funds and all. And these regulatory developments like the social stock exchange, the CSR law, the ESG disclosure standard, the sustainable finance task force. The government of India seems to be doing quite a few things to start bringing all of this together. So do you see that these regulations are having an effect, or any particular area of these regulations where it could have a resonance on this? These are beyond the AIF SEBI regulations, the kind of these other things. Are there any linkages there that you think could help drive in capital?
Like, see, for example, as far as SBI is concerned, when I'm funding it through my capital, so since I'm regulated by RBI also, there is a huge penalty on me in terms of risk-weighted capital which has to be allocated. So that is like one thing which is hampering us to provide a large capital pool for investing in this area. So this is one aspect, because obviously it's a high risky investment, and in our soul mind, you don't want to be part of the high, and as a bank that I cannot take high risky asset on board. So this is one thing which is actually hampering us when we are investing, that we have to keep aside a huge chunk of capital in terms of risk allocated.
I think look, our government is doing a lot of work in terms of equalizing at least the tax treatment for domestic capital as well as foreign capital. So, like I was saying, I'm privy to a lot of conversations from CII, etc., where a lot of effort is going towards harmonizing some of these regulations that make it a lot easier for domestic capital also to and rewarding for domestic capital also to take on this risk asset class. Having said that, I think you posed an important point on the retail investor participating in this asset class. Like I was saying earlier, a lot of retail investment is starting to go into these and at a surprisingly sometimes direct investments into startups. That's a good thing from a capital perspective, but sometimes it worries me that not all education that is required for these retail investors has been had before they are investing in capital into these businesses, and a bad economic environment like the one that we are seeing overall right now can make a lot of these people shy from investing capital into a more into perhaps a better way of deploying capital into these businesses, perhaps through funds or a little bit more institutionalized channels, as opposed to investing directly themselves. So that sometimes worries me, but a lot of capital is coming into this space.
Super, thank you. I do want to leave some time for questions. We have 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I think the whole schedule is moving ahead by 20 minutes. All right. So if there are any questions in the audience, could we please have them now?
SBI, I understand that not just one of the biggest public sector entity, but it also has a lot of legacy responsibility to climate finance. And right now I see that, you've also briefed that SBI is mostly investing through government of India. How open are you to work with the public sector players, or the private sector players, and what are the portfolio areas within climate finance that you would be exploring in your near future? Thank you.
We'll just take a couple more. Thank you for that very focused question. Yeah, and you can target the question to a particular panelist or ask.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Anand. I'm from Microsafe Consulting. The question I had was, so there are a lot of these accelerators and incubators in India. So if a firm comes via that route, does it give you more comfort, more confidence, or would you rather depend on your own assessments of firms individually? Thanks.
Thank you for that question. There's also a debate on that. Yes, please. I guess it's good to see there's so many questions.
Hi, I'm Manjushri from GCA Consulting. So we work with a lot of startups that are into product innovation. So they're not like, if you talk about climate investing, a lot of investment goes into tech companies. So what we work with startups that have product innovation, and that takes a lot more time. So it's difficult to make an equity case for them. So they get mostly debt finance. So what is your take on that?
Great, thank you. Should we maybe try to first quickly take those?
Answer to the question of the three. See, like you mentioned, like how we are investing through Government of India and how we want to participate with public and private players as well. See, the case is that, as I mentioned to you about, we were always there in that space, but maybe through different vehicles. But since this portfolio book, which I am actually handling, or you can say that the private equity term, it's a part of treasury. And when I come and when I invest in that, so the interest has to be aligned in the sense, what is my goal and what is my strategy. I just cannot open up and invest in some kind of an investments. So when I see, in the investment spectrum, there are some investments where they are traditional investments, but of course I don't have to worry about any ESG concern, and I'll be only looking for the returns. But when I go up in the ladder, I see that the responsible investment, impact investing comes into the picture, where I'll actually screen out, especially negative screen out in ESG risk management we do in our investments. So based on that, I'll do my investment, and that will form the selection of my investments. And when I move up into the ladder, where my focus area, where I as an institutional investor and dealing with public money, which I'm more comfortable in that, because the other means I'm meeting through my other subsidiaries and the foundation, SBI Foundation, which is a startup. It's only purely for that purpose, meeting SDG goals and creating ESG environment in India, and so sustainable impact investing. So where actually I found the ESG opportunities, where that carbon footprints, water supply, and all that stuff. I'll look into that. I'll be looking out for more investment in that category. And then we go up again in the ladder where the maximum impact solutions are found out. Those investments will be thematic investments. So theme and the financial return will drive my investment selections. In that, I already mentioned, for example, the example which I gave on the healthcare industry. The healthcare infrastructure is very poor in this country. Since we do have access, and it doesn't mean that everybody is having access. And more so, is it affordable? It's only for very few sect it is affordable. It is not affordable at all. So the technology which I was talking to the cited an example, that is more on towards affordable size, and it will be scaling entire India, changing the landscape in healthcare industry. So these two are main focus. So my interest, my strategy, and it has to be aligned with what we wanted to do. Slowly, when you go again in the spectrum, the impact first come into the picture, where you forgo the returns and you more focus on ESG spectrum. So these are the things where we have to find out where our interest lies and what is our strategy and entire ecosystem where we have to focus upon. So other things like we are meeting through our subsidiaries, I mentioned about that, and this portfolio book which I handle, it's more towards sustainable and thematic investment part.
Super. Any responses to the question on whether we prefer startups from incubators or not?
No, actually, for any investor, it is always helpful to have another, and I'll treat incubators also as institutional investors. It's helpful to have another set of eyes, ears that have looked at the business plan before you. So an investment coming through an accelerator, and typically I've seen tends to be because accelerators also want to focus on governance of the company, supporting them through various building blocks of a business, tend to be a little bit more structured. So always happy to look at companies that have an accelerator, and yes, there is a little bit of positive bias to a company that is coming from an accelerator, because there is an institutionalized investor at least, that has looked at the company, spent time with the business, and given it a thumbs up.
Super. And the last question, perhaps, is the most interesting one about the debt. I sort of misheard that, because normally what I've seen is that debt is very hard for early stage enterprises to get. Equity is much easier because they don't have the cash flows to support the debt. But given that both of you guys are banks, I'm sure that request, does that come up? Where you've given equity to somebody, but equally important for them is to have a debt relationship with an SBI or a SIDBI. So looking at it from both sides.
So under our FMS operations, we've been committing to venture debt funds too, which actually are giving debt to the startups that have been assisted through equity. So that is one part. The debt portion is getting addressed. Apart from this, there is a new development in SIDBI too, that we've recently started our venture debt operations, where we are looking at giving direct debt to startups which have been given equity by our own venture equity funds, where we have committed to the corpus of those AIFs and their beneficiaries. In case they have a requirement of venture debt, then we are looking at those startups. So that is a little bit different.
As I already mentioned about the startup branch, the first focus will be on the startup to give them provide a debt. especially for their working capital requirement. It will not be that, the scale will not be that much, but to start with, so that we can make them the part of the banking system.
This is something that I've been thinking about for a while, but as in the venture debt industry is evolving in the country, but I think we've got to, and the two gentlemen here are trying to do some interesting work on that space, but we've got to structurally figure out a way to be able to reduce cost of capital for these, especially cost of debt capital. You'd be surprised to know the cost of debt for these companies tends to be north of 20%. And these companies, when they are in growth stage, as investors, we will ding them, why are you burning so much money? On the other side, as venture debt investors, we want 20+% or part of it out of coupon from these companies. So this framework is developing, but I think that the structural cost of capital, debt capital for these startups is way too high. And this ecosystem needs to do some more work, and perhaps banks and entities like SIDBI have got to come up with structures and pools and pots of capital that can reduce their cost of debt.
So I think as the ecosystem develops, there are hardly, you can count on your fingers of one hand the number of venture debt funds that are there in the ecosystem. So as the ecosystem develops, there is more competition. I think the rates are bound to fall down, right?
Absolutely. And I think even if you look at this conferences, right? Like earlier it was all about equity. It was only the first track. Now, even when we have a whole track on blended finance largely is about enabling low-cost debt and allowing grants to even subsidize some of that debt. So it's nice to see that's happening even for not-for-profits. If you look at the social stock exchange rules, much of that focus is actually on NGOs. So it's nice to see innovation happening across the capital spectrum, from the ESG side to the NGO side. But I think the core of it always is going to be SMEs and private investing. These are the companies that make the most, these are what's a startup and what VC investors and the classic 2 and 20 model that we're all used to. So it's just great to see that becoming mainstream, thanks to folks such as all of yourselves.
Kartik, I think at one point you talked about retail investing. I think this is one place where I feel perhaps there are platforms like Red Avenue, etc., that are providing ultra HNIs and smaller family offices also to be able to put capital into these startups. But I think this is some place that retail investors essentially can start dabbling into these new age companies. And the cost of debt can essentially come down, because as a retail investor, your expectation is not necessarily to generate 22-23% interest. You're competing against a bank FD, which is yielding you 5%. So an 11-12% return also comes in handy for an ordinary individual like you and me. So I think that's the place where retail investor can essentially start to dabble in, if there is a way to be able to create a structure.
Superb. So I think, I know there's some more questions, and it's wonderful to see the interest. I think the panelists and myself will all be around for some time, I hope, and you guys can catch up with us. But I think if you look at the title of this session, just to do a quick summation, we've been very fortunate to get some wonderful investing perspectives from 3 large and leading Indian institutional LPs, a treasury function, a third-party capital, as well as a corporate business house. We're all looking at this in terms of market building, in terms of financial returns, and impact embedded in that. So I guess this is a lot of progress that has happened in the sector in the last 4 or 5 years. Even if you look at Prabhav itself, I think it's the 6th year of it, but it's a long ways to go. And it's thanks to the pioneering institutions like this and the ecosystem efforts of people like IIC that hopefully we will see a lot more private capital and government capital coming into the space beyond the banks, from the NBFCs, from the actually the pension and the life insurance people. That is going to fundamentally change things. And also on the retail side, I think slowly things are opening up. So with that, we will definitely like to just maybe give a round of applause to all of our panelists and to IIC for organizing this. And thank you all very much.